Hello, friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here, I share a brand new story every day. If you enjoy my videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's dive into today's story. A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Savannah, Georgia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board, which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space, lay fractured in two pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called, and she explained that her last two tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing their hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There's no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a baseball bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped, but I heard something else, whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet parakeet Charlie, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Charlie, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Charlie was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh, wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there. Forget it. It's their problem now. This true ghost story might strike you as more awe than eek, but only until you consider that we really have no idea what our four-legged friends can sense that we cannot, including the scariest of scary stories. Can dogs see ghosts? Well, there are plenty of dog experts out there, including veterinarians, who will attest to the fact that there's lots of documentation that could support the notion that dogs can sense paranormal activity, as Jesus Aramendi, DVM, a senior veterinarian for Chewy, put it. And then there's the fact that this story came directly from a well-known psychic medium, Christy Robinette, who has used her ghost whispering skills to help detectives solve confounding cases. Margaret settled onto her side of the bed and patted Tom's pillow beside her, Robinette told Reader's Digest. A year had gone by, but Margaret was still adjusting to widowhood. Maybe it was crazy to think that after 40 years of marriage, she would ever adjust. Max, the golden retriever, seemed to understand this from the very first. That cold, moonless night when Margaret returned alone from the hospital, Max did something he'd never done before. He jumped up onto Tom's side of the bed and lay his head on the pillow. Tom would never have allowed it, Robinette pointed out, but Margaret didn't shoo him off. Instead, she lay down beside Max and let the peaceful sound of his snoring lull her to sleep. The next night was the same, and the night after that. Over the past year, it had grown into a comforting routine. But not tonight. Tonight was the first time Max had left Margaret alone in the bed since Tom's passing. But hearing nails clicking on the wood floor downstairs, Margaret recognized the sound of Max requesting outsies. With a sigh, Margaret made her way down the stairs to the foyer. But Max wasn't pacing in front of the big oak door. Rather, he was dancing and wagging and wiggling and bowing, just like he used to do when Tom would come home from work. To Margaret, it felt as if Tom had just come home, and Robinette, who is known for her intuition about these things, believes that is, indeed, what happened. That night, as Margaret stood at the bottom of the stairs watching Max's joyful antics, a chill ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was there, someone unseen but deeply familiar. As she turned to head back upstairs, the air grew heavy and the faint scent of Tom's aftershave wafted past her. She paused, heart pounding, and listened. The house was still, but the atmosphere felt charged, as if the very walls held their breath. Margaret climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Max followed her, jumping onto Tom's side of the bed once more. As she lay there in the dark, she felt a gentle pressure on her hand, as if someone was holding it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't pull away. The sensation was both comforting and heart-wrenching. In the days that followed, little things began to happen around the house. Tom's favorite chair would sometimes rock gently on its own. The old record player would start up, playing their favorite song without anyone touching it. Margaret found herself talking to Tom as if he were still there, sharing her day and seeking his advice. One evening, while going through old photo albums in the attic, Margaret stumbled upon a letter she had never seen before. It was addressed to her in Tom's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it and read, "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you in body, but know that my spirit will always be by your side. You are the love of my life, and not even death can keep us apart. When you feel a gentle touch, hear our song, or see Max dancing as he did when I came home, know that it's me, reminding you that I am still here, loving you from beyond. Forever yours, Tom." Margaret clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She knew then that she wasn't alone, and she never would be. Tom's love was eternal, transcending even the boundaries of life and death. From that moment on, Margaret found peace in the knowledge that her beloved husband was always near, watching over her and Max until the day they would be reunited in the next life. My uncle's friend Lydia and her sister Clara stayed over one night at my uncle's house in Charleston, South Carolina. My uncle, Dr. James Whitfield, a renowned neurologist, lived in an old antebellum mansion that he had spent years restoring. The house, with its grand columns and sprawling gardens, was a testament to the grandeur of the Old South, and it had a rich history, one that included rumors of hauntings. Lydia and Clara arrived late in the evening, said. Exhausted from their long drive, they settled into one of the guest rooms on the second floor. The room was beautifully decorated with antique furniture, a canopy bed, and rich tapestries. As Lydia drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, as if the walls themselves were watching her. In the middle of the night, Lydia woke up to a strange noise. She sat up and saw a woman in an old-fashioned maid's uniform coming down the stairs. The maid was carrying a stack of fresh towels. Lydia watched, intrigued and a bit puzzled, but decided it must be one of the household staff. She lay back down and fell asleep again. A few hours later, she woke up again to see the same maid descending the stairs, this time with what looked like an old percolator. Lydia was impressed by the level of service and attention to detail. She had no idea that her uncle hired staff, especially ones who seemed so dedicated. She made a mental note to compliment him on his choice of help. The next morning, Lydia and Clara went downstairs to the dining room. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air. Dr. Whitfield was already there, chatting with his friend, Mark. They were engrossed in a conversation about the latest developments in neurology. Lydia joined them at the table, and after a bit of small talk, she asked, "Where did the maid go? I saw her bringing towels and a percolator down the stairs last night. Is she cooking breakfast now?" Dr. Whitfield looked at her, confused. "Maid? What maid?" Lydia described the woman she had seen. She mentioned the old-fashioned uniform, the meticulous way she carried herself, and the items she had been carrying. As she spoke, Dr. Whitfield's confusion turned into amusement. He chuckled and asked her to follow him. He led Lydia and Clara to the living room where a collection of old photographs hung on the wall. He pointed to a sepia-toned picture of a stern-looking woman in a maid's uniform. Lydia gasped. It was the same woman she had seen the night before. "That's Margaret," Dr. Whitfield said. "She worked here in the early 1900s. She was known for being incredibly dedicated to her work, but she's been dead for over a century." Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had seen Margaret with her own eyes, yet it was impossible. The room fell silent as they all pondered the implications. Determined to understand what she had experienced, Lydia began to research the history of the mansion. She discovered that Margaret had been a loyal servant to the family that originally owned the house. She was known for her tireless work ethic and her insistence on maintaining the highest standards of cleanliness and service. Margaret had lived and died in the house, and it seemed that her spirit had never left. As the days went by, Lydia began to notice more strange occurrences. Doors would open and close on their own, and she often heard faint footsteps echoing through the halls at night. She would sometimes catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure moving out of the corner of her eye, only for it to vanish when she turned to look. One evening, while reading in the library, Lydia heard a soft humming. It was a melodic tune, one that seemed vaguely familiar. She followed the sound to the kitchen, where she found Margaret's ghost, busying herself with chores as if she were still alive. The sight was both eerie and comforting. Margaret seemed to be at peace, content to continue her work in the afterlife. Lydia shared her experiences with Dr. Whitfield, who listened with a mix of skepticism and fascination. He was a man of science, and the idea of a ghostly presence in his home was difficult for him to accept. However, he couldn't deny the strange happenings that had been reported by others who had stayed in the mansion over the years. Intrigued, Dr. Whitfield invited a team of paranormal investigators to the house. They set up cameras and recording devices in an attempt to capture evidence of Margaret's ghost. Over the course of several nights, they recorded numerous instances of unexplained activity. Objects moved on their own, disembodied voices were heard, and the figure of a woman in a maid's uniform was captured on video. The investigators concluded that Margaret's spirit was indeed present in the mansion. They believed she remained out of a sense of duty and loyalty, continuing to care for the house and its occupants even in death. Dr. Whitfield, though still skeptical, found a new respect for the history of his home and the dedicated spirit that watched over it. As time went on, Lydia and Clara came to accept Margaret's presence as a part of the house's charm. They even began to feel a sense of companionship with the ghostly maid. Margaret's appearances became less frequent, but every now and then they would catch a glimpse of her or hear her soft humming, and they would smile, knowing she was still there, keeping watch over the mansion. Years later, Dr. Whitfield passed away, leaving the mansion to Lydia and Clara. They continued to live in the house, honoring its history and the spirit that dwelled within. Margaret's ghost became a beloved part of their lives, a reminder of the enduring connections that transcend time and space. In a quaint, historic neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia, nestled among the ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss, stood an old Victorian house. It was a beautiful, albeit slightly worn structure with a rich history that spanned over a century. This house, with its ornate gables and sprawling front porch, had been home to many families over the years. But it was the story of its original inhabitants that had always intrigued and haunted the current owner, Claire. Claire had moved into the house 5 years ago, drawn to its charm and character. She was a history buff and an avid reader of ghost stories, but she never expected to become part of one herself. One rainy afternoon, caught in a fit of procrastination, she decided to delve into the history of her home. She accessed the town's online newspaper archives, curious to see what she could uncover about the house and its former residents. She discovered that the house had been built by the Anderson family in the late 1800s. The family had a daughter named Emily, who grew up in the house. Emily never married and devoted her life to taking care of her widowed father until he passed away. Emily herself lived in the house until she died of old age. This bit of history gave Claire a sense of comfort, thinking that Emily's spirit might still be lingering, like continuing her lifelong habit of caring for the home and its inhabitants. Over the years, Claire and her family had experienced a series of unexplained yet oddly comforting occurrences. The vacuum cleaner would sometimes turn on by itself, and clothes or towels that had been carelessly dropped on the floor at night would be neatly folded and placed at the foot of the bed by morning. These events always left Claire with a feeling of warmth and protection rather than fear. One particularly memorable night, Claire's teenage daughter, Lily, came running into her room, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Mom, I heard someone in my room," she whispered urgently. Claire, trying to stay calm, followed Lily back to her room. The house was silent, except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. They checked the room thoroughly, but found nothing out of the ordinary. However, when Claire glanced at Lily's bed, she noticed that the pile of clothes Lily had left on the floor was now neatly folded at the foot of the bed. "It's just Emily," Claire said softly, trying to reassure her daughter. "She's just looking out for us." As the weeks went by, the activity in the house seemed to intensify. Claire started hearing soft footsteps in the hallway late at night. The sound of a distant humming, as if someone was singing a lullaby, would sometimes drift through the house. Claire often felt a gentle, comforting presence, especially when she was alone. One night, as Claire was reading in the living room, she felt a sudden chill. The temperature in the room dropped, and she could see her breath in the air. She looked up and saw a faint, shimmering figure standing at the foot of the staircase. It was a woman, dressed in a long, old-fashioned dress, her hair pinned up in a neat bun. Claire's heart raced, but she felt no fear. The figure looked at her with kind, sad eyes and then slowly faded away. Determined to understand more about Emily and her life, Claire continued her research. She visited the local historical society and unearthed old letters and photographs. She learned that Emily had been a kind and gentle soul, known in the community for her charitable work and her unwavering dedication to her father. It became clear that Emily's spirit had remained in the house, a guardian watching over those who lived there. Claire decided to reach out to a local medium, hoping to communicate with Emily and offer her some peace. The medium, an elderly woman named Agnes, arrived one evening carrying a bag filled with candles, crystals, and other tools of her trade. She walked through the house, her eyes closed, whispering softly to herself. After a while, Agnes sat down at the dining room table and beckoned Claire to join her. She placed her hands on the table and closed her eyes. "Emily is here," she said softly. "She has been here for many years, caring for this house and of everyone in it. She wants to make sure her home is always filled with love and care." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "Can we speak to her? Can we help her find peace?" Agnes nodded. "Emily, we are here to honor you and thank you for your care. If you wish to move on, know that your legacy will always be remembered and cherished." The room grew colder, and Claire felt a gentle breeze brush past her. The candles flickered, and the sound of soft humming filled the air once more. Agnes smiled. "She says thank you. She feels your love and is at peace knowing her home is in good hands." As the weeks passed, the paranormal activity in the house gradually subsided. The vacuum cleaner stayed silent, and the clothes remained on the floor until Claire or Lily picked them up. But every now and then, on a quiet evening, Claire would catch a faint whiff of lavender, Emily's favorite scent, and she would smile, knowing that their gentle guardian was still watching over them. Years later, when Claire's grandchildren visited, they would sit around the fireplace and listen to her tell the story of Emily, the loving spirit who had made their house a home. The tale of Emily Anderson became a cherished family legend, a testament to the enduring power of love and dedication. And Claire, now an elderly woman herself, found comfort in the thought that one day she too might join Emily in the house, continuing the tradition of care and protection for future generations. In the heart of New Orleans, nestled in the historic Garden District, stood an old Creole townhouse that had seen its fair share of history and mystery. The house had belonged to Megan's family for generations, a grand two-story structure with wrought iron balconies and tall, shuttered windows. Its faded elegance hinted at a time when the city was a bustling port of grandeur and decadence. Megan and her best friend, Sophie, loved to spend their summer breaks exploring the nooks and crannies of the old house, always hoping to uncover a hidden treasure or a long forgotten secret. One sultry summer afternoon, Megan and Sophie were rummaging through the attic, a dusty space filled with old trunks, faded photographs, and cobweb covered furniture. The air was thick with the scent of old books and aged wood. They were both 16 and full of youthful curiosity and a sense of adventure. As they sorted through a pile of old clothes, they heard a soft, low grunt coming from the corner of the attic. They froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "Did you hear that?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Megan nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yeah, I heard it too." They both turned towards the sound, their eyes straining to see through the dim light. There was nothing there, just an old rocking chair that had belonged to Megan's great-grandmother. They dismissed it as their imaginations playing tricks on them and continued their exploration. Later that evening, as they sat down to dinner with Megan's parents, the strange occurrence in the attic still lingered in their minds. Unable to keep it to themselves any longer, they decided to share the story, albeit leaving out the part where they were searching for hidden stashes of love letters. "Mama, Papa," Megan began cautiously, "something strange happened in the attic today." Her father looked up from his plate. Curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, strange?" Sophie chimed in. "We heard a noise, like a grunt, and there was no one else up there." Megan's mother, a practical woman, frowned. "Are you sure it wasn't just the house settling? Old houses make noises, you know." Before they could respond, Megan's younger sister, Lily, burst into tears. She had been quietly picking at her food, but now her sobs filled the room. Everyone turned to her in surprise. "Lily, what's wrong?" their mother asked, concern etched on her face. Through her tears, Lily confessed, "I've seen a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed the last few nights. I didn't tell anyone because I thought you would think I was crazy." The room fell silent, the weight of Lily's words hanging in the air. Megan and Sophie exchanged nervous glances. If Lily was seeing things too, then something more sinister might be at play. After that night, Megan and Sophie became determined to uncover the truth about the mysterious occurrences in the house. They began researching the history of the property, visiting the local library, and poring over old records and newspapers. They discovered that the house had been built in the early 1800s by a wealthy merchant named Jean-Luc Duval, who had lived there with his wife and two daughters. Tragedy struck the family when one of the daughters, Isabel, died under mysterious circumstances. The more they dug, the more they learned about Isabel's untimely death. Rumors of an ill-fated love affair and a broken-hearted ghost began to surface. Some said Isabel had fallen in love with a sailor who had promised to take her away, but he never returned, leaving her to die of a broken heart. Others whispered that she had been pushed down the stairs by a jealous suitor. One evening, as the girls sat in the dimly lit library of the house, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and dusty books, they felt a sudden chill. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the air grew heavy. Megan looked at Sophie, who had gone pale. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sophie nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Yes, it's like someone's here with us." Just then, they heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. They turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. It was the silhouette of a woman in a long dress, her face obscured by the darkness. Megan's heart raced as she recognized the figure from the old family portrait they had found earlier that day. It was Isabel. The figure moved closer, and Megan could see the sadness in her eyes. She felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and longing emanating from the ghost. Isabel seemed to reach out to them, her translucent hand extending towards the old leather-bound journal on the table. Megan picked up the journal and opened it, revealing pages filled with handwritten letters and diary entries. It was Isabel's journal, detailing her forbidden love affair with the sailor and her heartbreak when he never returned. The final entry was particularly poignant, expressing her undying love for him and her despair over never being able to be with him. As they read the journal, the figure of Isabel slowly faded away, leaving behind a feeling of peace and resolution. It was clear that she had been trapped in the house, unable to move on until her story was known. The next morning, Megan and Sophie shared their findings with Megan's parents and Lily. They all agreed to hold a small ceremony to honor Isabel's memory and help her spirit find peace. They gathered in the garden under the ancient oak tree and read aloud from Isabel's journal, acknowledging her pain and her love. As they finished the ceremony, the air seemed to lighten, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree. For the first time in years, the house felt truly at peace. From that day forward, the strange occurrences in the house ceased. The vacuum cleaner stayed silent, and the dark figure no longer haunted Lily's nights. Megan and Sophie continued to feel a sense of connection to the house's history, but now it was a connection filled with respect and understanding, rather than fear. Years later, when Megan inherited the house, she made sure to preserve its history and share Isabel's story with visitors. The house became a place of learning and remembrance, a testament to the enduring power of love and the importance of giving voice to those who have been forgotten. And as for Sophie, she remained Megan's closest friend, always ready to embark on another adventure, whether it was exploring the attic for hidden treasures or uncovering the secrets of the past. Their bond, strengthened by the experiences they shared in that old Creole townhouse, lasted a lifetime, and the story of Isabel's love and heartbreak became a cherished part of their own history. It was late on a Friday night, and I was wrapping up my shift as the night security guard at the Westwood Community Center. The facility was a sprawling complex that included a gymnasium, several conference rooms, a library, and of course, the indoor pool. I had taken the job a few months ago, thinking it would be an easy way to earn some extra cash while I studied for my night classes. Little did I know, the quiet hours of the night would bring more than just peace. That night, everything seemed normal. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft lapping of water against the pool's edge were the only sounds. The air was thick with chlorine, and the blue glow from the underwater lights cast eerie shadows on the ceiling. I sat in the security office, watching the monitors, occasionally glancing at my phone to pass the time. Suddenly, out of the stillness, I heard the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. It echoed off the tiled walls, bright and innocent, but also entirely out of place. I sat up, my heart rate spiking. The laughter was quickly followed by the pitter-patter of bare feet running across the pool deck. I jumped out of my chair, my mind racing. No children were supposed to be here at this hour. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the office, the beam cutting through the dimly lit hallway. As I approached the pool area, the laughter ceased abruptly, leaving only the sound of my own footsteps and the persistent hum of the lights. I pushed open the door to the pool with a sense of urgency. The cool, moist air hit me as I scanned the area. The pool was empty, its surface calm and undisturbed. I walked along the deck, my eyes darting to every shadowy corner. There was nobody in sight. The doors were all closed and locked, exactly as I had left them. There was nowhere a child could be hiding, no nooks or crannies big enough to conceal someone. I knelt down and examined the pool deck more closely, looking for wet footprints that might betray the presence of the child I had heard. The tiles were bone dry. My skin prickled with unease as I stood up and retraced my steps. I rechecked the doors, pulling on each one to ensure it was securely locked. I returned to the security office and reviewed the security monitors with meticulous care. Every hallway, every room, and every corner of the building was displayed in grainy black and white. There was no sign of movement, no flicker of a shadow that didn't belong. I rewound the footage, scanning for any anomalies, but there was nothing. The building was as empty as it had been all night. I sank back into my chair, my mind churning with questions. Had I imagined it? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something unseen lurking just out of sight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a ghostly figure standing in the doorway. The rest of the night passed without incident, but the sense of unease never left me. When my shift ended and the morning guard arrived, I was eager to leave. As I walked to my car, the events of the night replayed in my mind. The laughter, the footsteps, the inexplicable absence of any evidence, it was all so surreal. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I spoke to my coworkers, hoping someone might have experienced something similar, but no one had. They shrugged it off, attributing it to the quirks of an old building. Yet I knew what I had heard. It wasn't my imagination. I began to dig into the history of the community center, wondering if there might be an explanation. I discovered that the land it was built on had once been the site of an orphanage, which had burned down in the 1950s. The children who had lived there were said to have perished in the fire. The story sent chills down my spine. Could the laughter I heard have been one of their spirits, still lingering, bound to the place where they had met their tragic end? The thought haunted me, making each night shift a test of my nerves. I never heard the laughter again, but every now and then I would catch a fleeting shadow out of the corner of my eye or feel a cold breeze on my neck where there should be none. The unsettling experience left a mark on me, a reminder that sometimes the past is never truly gone, and the echoes of lost souls can still reach out to us from the darkness. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.